Welcome to Xagility. I'm your host, John Coleman. Joe Justice, welcome to the Xagility podcast. How are you doing today?
Fantastic, John. Thank you for having me.
Joe, which part of the world are you in today?
I'm in Hawaii. I'm in Honolulu, Hawaii at the moment, where I have an office. There's an office here and one in Tokyo. And right now I'm in Hawaii.
Nice. I'm from England. It's quite a time difference between us at the moment, but thank you so much for joining the Xagility podcast. Joe, I know you for a few things. You're fairly well known in the agile space. That's an understatement, really. You did some TEDx talks, some TED Talks, I believe, as well. And one of the talks was to do with your work at WIKISPEED. It was a more recent one, TEDx, where it was basically the work you were doing at Tesla, more or less, and what you were doing in 2020 around that time. And most recently, and now you can see there's an image behind you as well. For the people listening, they can't see this, but there's an image of some kind of thing, something to do with a rocket behind you, or a couple of rockets, maybe 3 or 4 of them. I'm curious what that background's all about, Joe. What are you up to at the moment?
SpaceX doesn't use product owners or scrum masters or scrum or most of what we would typically call agile. They're beyond that. And I think these rockets, seeing that, explains much more clearly what the concept of a product owner has become in SpaceX. These are 3 Starship rockets, and SpaceX is currently making right about 1 a month. This is rocket 22, 23, and 24. They simply named them the iteration number. You could think of it like a sprint. And what a product owner has become in SpaceX to make it go this fast in stuff that is this complicated and this huge and this expensive. These are the most efficient rockets ever made and the largest. So it's not just that rockets are made once a sprint, it's that better rockets than anyone has ever made by the fundamental metrics to measure rockets, which is kilograms into orbit by cost to do that. Far and away, the best rockets in the world are being made super fast. So that's unusual. How do you get the most rapid innovation on the best product at the best price? It's the architecture. So the bottom of each of these rockets, you can actually see it in this picture that I took. This picture is maybe 2 weeks old now, from Boca Chica or Starbase, Texas. You can see the known stable interface. It's a platform that these starships are bolted to. And you can see it's the same known stable interface here at the top. This is called the booster. So these starships attach to the top of the booster and the ground. This is your hardware integration test, and this is autonomous. Cranes autonomously dock these things. So you know Starship bottom boots to booster top, and that includes the electric connections, the cooling connections, the fueling connections. Those are all part of these interfaces. What that allows is Starship is an integral part of a booster. So these are separate work streams. We have 3 Starships here, and one booster is the first stage of Starship. And in any other rocket ever made by humans, that's viewed as one thing that you cut into 2 parts. Well, in SpaceX, they view these as 2 completely separate products that share an interface. What that means is they innovate at different speeds. The example here is that we're looking at Starship 22, 23, and 24, and we're looking at booster number 19. They're not on the same number. I think that's this booster's number. There's another picture where I know it's booster 4, but I think this is 19. They're not on the same cadence. They don't have to be. They're not dependent. They're backwards compatible. So you have one company, basically, inside SpaceX, building boosters as fast as they can. Never 2 are unique. Never 2 are the same. They're all unique. They're all experiments to be better. And a separate company, if you will, inside SpaceX is making the starships as fast as they can. Now there's another company that makes the rocket motors inside these. This is the Raptor series. The Raptor series is used across all starships and boosters. They share that like a common supplier. You could think of it like a AA battery. You can put it in different products. Now you continue to innovate that AA battery, different chemistry, thinner sidewalls, so more battery chemistry fits inside, lower cost. Raptor engine is a completely separate work stream, and no 2 have ever been made the same. SpaceX has famously said they make a new Raptor engine, new design, new pipes, new wiring, new electronics, new software every 2 days. So these Raptor engines are a separate work stream entirely, like a separate company that's consumed by Starship and Booster. Now these launch pads, that is its own product with its own team. The launch pads also are not static. They change daily. Different sets of connections, software, fueling, cooling, robustness to hold the rockets to the Earth until time to release and launch them, or even to catch them on landing, which is a new concept all together. So they continue to innovate the launch tower and then the launch pad. So you have these parallel executing work streams. What a product owner has become in SpaceX is, what parallel executing work streams should we have? What is the optimal split of work? And then ask them, what should the interface be? And of what Starship says the interface should be, and Booster and Landing Pad say the interface should be, what's the Venn diagram of overlap? What do they all agree on? That's the next version. How fast can we build it? Build it immediately. So what product ownership has become is the company structure for maximum speed of parallel innovation, which is not too different than really fast software companies, actually. When you hear about years ago, the Spotify model, which is now hopelessly out of date, and Spotify themselves is doing something much more evolved, but it's still a very useful, easy to understand model. The Playbar team is separate from the Playlist team, and they don't have to wait on each other. You can deploy a different Playbar module at a completely different cadence than a different Playlist module. This parallel execution enabled Spotify's nimble speed. SpaceX is doing the same thing in hardware, which is what product ownership has become. That's the picture of what's happening behind me. That's related to my passion project, which is space housing. Wouldn't it be neat if there were 8 billion floating homes, truly even affordable? Like, actually, someone from Uganda could have their floating home with their own little factory. And what inspires this is NASA reported 2 years ago now, and they continue to have better and better updates, that they've now found as many galaxies as there are humans that have ever lived. So the idea of environmentalism isn't how do we make the most of this planet's resources, a lovely, non-damaging way that honors all species. That's still important, but that's no longer the ultimate for environmentalism. The ultimate for environmentalism is, how do you get each person to their own galaxy? Because that's the real game we're playing. So it's that. If it's going to take you at current speeds a few generations to reach some of these even near systems, then you need some mechanism that is a lovely, productive, interesting culture package to transport you to your new galaxy, your new kingdom, although I hope it's more evolved than the idea of kingdom and top-down monarchy. But anyway, that's my passion project. So to start with, I'm trying to get something, an RV, kind of Airstream, a Starship launch account to buy out a Starship launch and make the steel structure remain in orbit as the exterior. Basically, a nice Airstream trailer is the prototype.
Joe, you've reminded me of a wonderful video from 2017. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, Earth to Earth by SpaceX, where they showed anywhere on Earth. Remember that? I show it at product owner classes when I'm trying to explain the goals and multiple time horizons, direction of travel. Forgive the pun, direction of travel. But the idea that it might be overwhelming for a typical agile team to do what you're suggesting, for example, for your passion project. But maybe there's some goal along the way that's in a closer time horizon that maybe we can get our head around. We can still try to aim for that, but move towards it. And I'm curious because I talk about, for example, maybe 6 to 9 month goals, and then you might have a 1 to 3 year vision, and then you might have 5+ years almost impossible perfection vision. Where you're going as well with this passion project, it sounds like you're in the almost impossible perfection vision, and then what do we need to do to get there? Is that what happens in SpaceX? Is it about goals, or is there another way to deal with that?
What Musk does is, Musk has 1,000-year vision of what does currency mean 1,000 years from now if people are living in different solar systems? What does truth and fact-finding mean? What does power generation mean? What does the concept of a business mean 1,000 years from now? And Musk works back from that in what's called the master plan. And the master plan is never longer than a page, and it's easy to tweet. So it can be summarized in a single tweet, and the full text is never longer than a page. And Musk is now on Master Plan 3. So the first 2 have already happened. So those are the work back chunks. And they make a highly predictable trajectory, because on 1,000 years, you don't know the details, but you definitely know that diesel excavators are not going to be useful on Mars or the moon. So what is the future of construction? Probably don't want to bet big on diesel. You're looking at 1,000-year vision, and you're trying to build towards 1,000-year vision. So it narrows the set. And it says, of the known existing tech, battery tech is far and away the best fit of what we know now. So let's go big on battery tech. Okay, that makes sense. Because of what we know now, there could be something cooler later, but of what we have access to now, what we could do today, what is directionally correct, to that 1,000-year vision. And all the decisions of the Musk companies flow back very easily from that. It's clear enough that this is part of why there's so much self-management across all the Musk companies, because the goal is clear. Like anyone in Tesla or SpaceX knows, probably not the best idea to make a big investment in diesel tech. That's not directionally useful with the 1,000-year vision. So Musk does not have to be a gatekeeper to say yes or no to what anybody wants to do. The vision is clear enough, working back from that vision. Now, John, what you just said about product ownership maps perfectly to how I understand that concept to play. So I would say anyone looking to do well in a Musk company would probably do well to be educated by you on product ownership.
Sure, so thank you. Just stepping back a little bit, it's no surprise really that you're doing what you're doing at the moment from my point of view, because you really blew the world away when you were making cars very quickly. You did a famous talk on that, and it must have been well over 10 years ago now, I'm guessing, Joe, is it? Yeah. Even way back then, you were talking about cloud stuff that was only available 5 years, the likes of Dropbox and stuff like that, that you wouldn't have been able to do what you were doing at the time without some of that technology at the time. So you're developing cars very quickly, you were selling cars, you developed a community. And so I guess that kind of demonstrates the quality in terms of being able to do, having the right attitude, a can-do attitude to make things happen. So it's not a surprise to me that you ended up in Tesla. What happened to you between WIKISPEED and getting to Tesla? Was that a kind of a natural transition, or did a few things happen in between there?
In 2010, I consulted to Tesla. I met them through WIKISPEED at the Progressive Insurance Automotive X Prize. Tesla early on was a participant. Then at the largest auto show in the world at that time, January 2011. So actually we were setting up in 2010, at the end of 2010. I worked with the Model S team. Worked with is too grand a word. I had conversations with and consulted to the Model S team, mostly around modularity, increasing the amount of modularity in the Model S. It was still a very Mercedes-Benz influenced design, still very much like an S-Class, like an electric S-Class. And I guided them towards a more agile design, which ultimately did happen. Then I set up agile trainings in Tesla in, I believe it was 2016, around 6 years later, and then joined as a full-time employee in 2020. So the transition there to me seems very organic, very agile, a set of iterations of becoming more and more aware of how to best add value in a company that's operating like Tesla.
You were talked about people working 12-hour shifts, and some people were doing 3 or 4 days a week, some were doing 7 days a week if they were really passionate, but as long as they were keeping their energy. How did you manage your energy while you were at Tesla? That sounds like a very intense experience.
Man, so I would actually usually come in an hour or more early and walk the facility and take notes, take pictures, videos, and written notes in an actual notebook, a pocket-sized paper notebook, of what was upstream from where I thought I was likely going to be working most of that day, what was coming. And then I'd typically stay another hour, sometimes 2 hours after my 12 hours, going downstream. What I worked on today, where is it now? What is it happening now? And then working in different areas of the facilities. Through that, going upstream and downstream, I really did get to go to every single part of Tesla Fremont, California facility, also SpaceX Boca Chica and SpaceX Hawthorne, California, and learned a lot that way, going upstream and downstream. Because I think a lot of people don't realize how much cross work there is across all the Musk companies. They really are all pieces of X.com. So you're really in a common ecosystem. That was super exhausting. I loved it, but I decided to keep some other projects going. Tesla explicitly allows you to have multiple employment or run your own company on the side. They say that there will be zero accommodations for that. You will have no additional accommodation for the fact that you have an additional job over someone who doesn't. You have to perform just as anyone, provided you do, zero restriction, go for it. So I would teach agile courses online on my days off, and I wrote updates to my book, Scrum Master, on my days off. I was very interested to finish that book before joining Tesla so I could see what is it I thought I knew and then update it. And interestingly, the book was pretty close. I was very grateful for what I had learned up to that date. It was pretty close. But I am still making updates on what I continue to learn because I continue to collaborate with different companies around the world and the Musk companies. So the book is in Agile version. It's now in version 19F on Amazon, and version 20 is in the works. It's in 7 languages now. So that happened. So what do you do to keep your energy up when you're throwing yourself at something like this? And I moved house and home. I set up my own solar powered factory during that time to prototype different types of manufacturing process and a new relationship at that time, not too long after I got married. So I was trying to provide the right amount of emotional and love support to make that relationship grow the way I thought was important. That was super difficult. And even just sleeping enough became a real issue. And I don't know how many people know the effects on the human brain with sleep deprivation, especially repetitive sleep deprivation. And then also I did a lot of attention to my physical exercise and nutrition, but it still wasn't perfect. And any lack of perfection in nutrition at that level, you feel it energetically and it fogs your brain immediately. So that was the closest I've ever come to extreme endurance sports. I've done powerlifting and I'm a 5th degree black belt, and I've done some very intense physical activities. And working at Tesla is something maybe everyone could do if they focus on it. Working at Tesla while teaching online courses, editing a book, starting a new relationship, setting up a factory, and racing my own Tesla at the time as part of Tesla Corsa. Yeah, that was extremely difficult. That said, I would not trade it. And if I can, I would do it again.
Thank you for sharing that, Joe. The other thing I noticed as well when you were at some of the talks that I saw you giving about, I think it might have been about Agile at Tesla, because it would have been in the last couple of years that I would have seen these talks by you, and you talked about really short sprints. For people listening that might be familiar with Scrum, it's an approach for delivering value really quickly, and there's the concept of planning and dailies and reviews and retrospectives and continuous improvement basically. But I heard you talking about 3-hour sprints and dailies every hour, and I'm curious what kind of sprints they were. Like, were they really more like you were planning the next few hours, but not so much doing review and retro, was really more about planning a few hours at a time? Is that what you meant by that, Joe, or how did that work?
John, I'm really glad to get to talk about this with you. There's 2 points that I would like to try to clarify. One is how much change can happen in a short amount of time. And then the second is the idea of sprints. So first, Tesla has 60 new parts introduced every day. That's design, engineering, testing, deployment in cars. 60 new parts a day. And that means also Tesla attempts to retire 61 or more parts. The idea is to reduce total number of supported parts. So that means these new parts should be backwards compatible. You don't have to warehouse the previous parts. Any time the old part breaks in the field, they get the new one. They should be backwards compatible. That's the wish. So you have a continuous reduction in total supported number of parts every day and 60 new ones every day. So that means you are mobbing, basically.
Okay.
For anyone who's done mob on the engineering and the install and the fabrication, you're going end to end from an idea to installed in cars that are being sold in 3 hours or less every day. And that is fundamentally important. I continue to consult to manufacturing companies worldwide, and they ask the same question. In a short cycle, you're talking about it, or you're making a request for budget, or you're collaborating with a supplier on what could happen. No, you're going from idea to installed new part. And this pace is foreign enough that a lot of people ask for clarification. So for a concrete example, this year, the headlights, taillights, and charge port of the Model S and X changed in 2 days. The headlights, the taillights, and the charge port of the Model S and X changed in 2 days. And in BMW or Mercedes-Benz or Lexus or Mitsubishi or Ford or GM, that would be a 2.5 year to 5 year project. And that was 2 days at Tesla. So when people see that Tesla's total company value today is worth as much as every other car company on planet Earth added together, this is what drives that. This is what creates that value, that financial worth of the company, is the speed of innovation. So that's the first, is how much changes this fast. And the mechanism of it is in mob. I'd like to talk to you about that, John, and then please try to help me not forget then about the concept of sprint.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, because I work in a Scrum team myself as well at scrum.org, and sometimes we pair and sometimes we swarm, where maybe somebody's kind of leading on the call on Teams or Zoom or whatever, and then we're all chipping in kind of thing. And what I enjoy the most is mobbing, where we're taking turns at the steering wheel, so to speak, and everyone's navigating. They're not fixing my spelling mistakes, but they're thinking about design and they're thinking about what we should be doing. And it's a great way to learn. And it reminds me of a story of a company I worked with in Cincinnati, and they had this scheme where they used to hire ex-military veterans. And the way in the United States, there's a lot of respect for people who worked in the military and thank you for your service and all that. And they had these schemes where zero knowledge at the start of a 12-month period, and within 12 months from mobbing, taking turns at the steering wheel, so to speak, they were as good as anybody else in the team. Is that what your people who might have come back, they might have been quite distraught actually from the military service, and they mightn't have had that many professional skills, the very good military skills, but what they did was they went from like zero knowledge at the start of a 12-month period, and within 12 months from mobbing, taking turns at the steering wheel, so to speak, they were as good as anybody else in the team. Is that what you're kind of talking about, Joe? That kind of stuff? Yeah, cool, yeah. And it's almost easier to do that online, I think, than doing it face to face, because we don't need to smell each other's aftershave and deodorant and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, this you can just literally pass the keyboard around, can't you, on the tools? The tooling is fantastic these days.
Virtual work has so many advantages if you have a virtual product. So if your product is bits and bytes, virtual work has many advantages. It's actually harder in some ways to physically work remote on a physical product. And in some ways, it's easier to mob on a physical product as long as you're physically present, because you understand so much about touching it and handing it to each other.
Yeah.
When you hold an interface in hardware, you have much more experiential understanding of it, and your ability to improve or engineer to that interface is, I will assert, dramatically more in-depth and complete than when you're trying to probe an API remotely. So for a virtual product, virtual work seems to be maybe superior to physical work. For a physical product, physical proximity is almost essential. It can be done virtually, but there's some real trade-offs and special environmental consideration. And I had a chance to do both in the Musk companies. But what I will say is mobbing on something physical is as easy as dumping a bucket of Legos on the floor with a bunch of kids. Like, instruction is just not needed at the same level as you would for mobbing virtually, or even mobbing in the same location on a virtual product. When you have a physical product, it really is like playing Lego. And the amount of training, like basically you need safety training and some type of introduction to cultural boundaries, and you go. It's actually extremely easy to do mob work, pair work, ensemble work in general on hard goods, provided they have a known stable interface.
We're touching on a point that I was going to ask you later on, but I might as well ask you about it now. We will come back to the sprint as well. But just to do with the idea of specialists. In the last few years, Joe, I've been working with a lot of people in non-tech, non-software even, like fast-moving consumer goods, and now I'm back in tech again. But it's been interesting. I've worked with people with like double PhDs, triple PhDs, published papers, all these kind of things, and they said they couldn't do each other's work because they had completely different types of PhD. And what I was saying to them was that not everything you do is part of your PhD. A lot of it's quite basic stuff. And it was kind of interesting. One of the guys actually went to paternity leave, and the rest of the team, because they were mobbing, actually, the rest of the team were able to cope okay for the month or so that he was out. But I do get pushback a lot about the idea of single skill specialists, where there's a perception, and maybe it's the reality, that it takes maybe 2 or 3 years to learn that technical specialty. And so the momentum is towards, let's leave those specialists work on their own, and they'll serve from some kind of center of excellence or whatever, or some specialist team, and then they'll serve other teams. The team topologies guys can talk about something similar as well, where they talk about complicated subsystems where you kind of let them off and they let them stay there, kind of thing. I'm curious what you've done in Tesla, and maybe currently with SpaceX and previously with WIKISPEED, with the whole idea of specialists. I'm reading between the lines that it's all about pairing and mobbing and swarming, it's just working together and not both being individual. But I'm curious to hear from yourself how you deal with that situation.
John, I love your story about the team being able to continue on even while a critical skill set arguably was represented in a person that took paternity leave. And also a good story about sustainable pace and the importance of family. Glad they got to take the paternity. First, the shortcut is you anticipated what I would say perfectly. It is about mobbing and group work and group understanding. Then a mechanism under that I think I understand better now is the goal is a product. And product specialists are welcome. Product specialists can mob because by definition, you're cross skill. Products require many skills. So if you are a rocket specialist, yeah, join. You'll be great in all the mobs that have to do with rockets. And in fact, a lot of what you do will be great for cars and AI as well, because guess what's inside cars? A lot of the same stuff that's in rockets, if it's a really good car, a really modern car. A boring system, a tunneling system actually has a lot of commonalities with rockets and really good software to make on-the-fly changes with the environment around the tunneling system is not that different than robots that apply paint and coating. So if you are a product specialist, that works great. But as soon as we have skills specialists, that's already the idea of a silo anyway. So what the Musk companies do is they refuse to hire skill specialists. They don't have them. It's not, oh, you go work over here. We don't want to pay you a salary. Musk very often says he's hired a few people in spite of their PhDs, but never because of one. Now, if there were product-specific PhDs, that's essentially what Musk companies are making. When you have a SpaceX veteran advertise or be advertised, SpaceX veteran joined this company, so that company's valuation suddenly jumps up. The market understands the value of people that have performed in Musk companies. It's because what they essentially are product specialists, and it's something that no school is effectively creating now.
Indeed, and it's about learning and the willingness to learn extra things even if you know so much. And I think I watched some documentary about Elon himself, and he was looking for some, I don't know, was it a rocket engineer or a rocket scientist, and he couldn't find the one he was looking for, so he just started learning it himself basically. And eventually I guess he probably did get the right people around him. But getting back to the sprint again, Joe, before we forget, so 3-hour sprint or a day sprint or whatever it is what you meant by that really more like a mobbing for 3 hours? Was that the kind of what you mean by that, or more or less?
Yeah. So when I first came to Tesla, I had just spent 6 years being very deep in specifically the Scrum aspect of agility. And going into Tesla, I saw a lot of things through Scrum colored glasses. And I don't think that makes it right or makes it wrong, but that's how I was able to perceive things. And it largely mapped. There were some aspects that just didn't map. And in many of those early conversations, I would say I'm still trying to process what I learned there. And even running the Agile program, I was very surprised to not see any Scrum teams, no product owners, no Scrum masters. And I was trying to process that because financial decisions were being made continuously, not on a sprint cadence, and not by any one person, not by a product owner, but by everyone. So how was this working? And there wasn't a process specialist or impediment remover per team. And in fact, I don't think I was even able to realize this very well at the time. There weren't even teams. There were goals and people working on them. And it was role-less. It is role-less. It is accountability-less. How is this functioning? And I still think I'm processing what I learned as I continue to collaborate with the Musk company. But this part, I think I understand much better. The well understood pieces of agility that would make someone very well prepared to join a Musk company are if you're comfortable with open space and if you're comfortable with mobbing. And essentially starting work in Tesla, if you join an open space conference and look at the open space agenda, here's these physical areas like conference room A, conference room B, conference room C, the end of hallway such and such, by the water fountain, however open space conferences evolve, which is part of the beauty of it. New spaces evolve as people figure out where they can meet. Then from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., we're going to try to understand this topic, or so-and-so is an expert on this topic and is going to talk about it, or do Q&A, or no one understands this topic. People who are interested, even though none of us understand, are going to meet here, right? Coming into Tesla is exactly the same. Here's the inspection line 2. It's doing a new form of digital self-management today. If you're passionate about inspection line 2 and digital self-management, you're welcome here. Here is Model Y fender assembly. We're doing a different type of water penetration testing, a different type of sealing, and we've moved from a 3-part inner fender to a 2-part inner fender, and we've changed the alloy. There's a different robot, and there's a mob of engineers right there right now machining new fixtures to hold the parts and programming the robots to cope with the new fixture. If you want to throw yourself into that dog pile, it's over here. And you have all these areas you can go. You go there and you join the mob. It's very much like an open space agenda, and you can propose items too. So everyone's empowered, and then you join. And that is structurally very much like how all the Musk companies operate on the day-to-day, like an open space and with mob. You still need spending money You still want to do that efficiently and on mission, but the Musk companies don't do that with managers or reviews or pitch meetings or budgets. They do it with digital self-management. And that is the result of more than a decade of highly funded projects to give faster feedback loops for decisions you made. Say you just bought a robot and it's changing the way a tab is bent and twisted over here. In real time, does that decrease the maintenance cost, the production cost, the production time, the maintenance time, and increase customer visible value? If you have a projection that gives you that information in real time, you don't need a manager saying, good job for buying that robot. If it was a bad idea that you bought that robot, it just went up 10 euro per car and cost another 3 minutes. Oh no. Okay, now your job is to mob on that robot until it returns the value you thought it should, or scrap it, or whatever you have to do. Fix what you did, and you'll attract other people to that mob. So you don't have manager escalations or budget meetings like in a traditional waterfall command and control company, and you don't have a centralized product owner making budget decisions like you would in Scrum. And there is no sprint cadence. As soon as something is complete, how do you even say that? It's like development on main. You are working on production constantly. So there's no sprint. Anytime production is reduced, your immediate mob is make it gooder, make it better. So there's no sprint, there's no product owner, there's no scrum master. But there definitely is the effects of those roles. So as someone who did spend 6 years going deep in Scrum, I still recommend Scrum very highly. I think its superpower is to help companies get to less than 30-day iterations, which most companies in hardware are nowhere near that.
Yeah, that'd be a result for them, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you about trust then, because the word trust came into my mind while you were talking, because you were saying we mightn't even have teams, and I like the work on the Cynefin complexity model, and Dave Snowden, he wrote a guide for the EU on how to deal with complexity in a crisis, and he talked about how you get trust. And so one way you have a team of people and we go through the Tuckman phases or whatever, or we go through our J curves and we get better together and we bond and so on. And the other way that he mentioned was that people work in crews, which I found was a bit of a light bulb for me, that if you had a fire crew, for example, and let's say there was one fire crew driver, his name was Colin, for example, and he's very well trained, but then there's another lady called Mary and she's equally well trained. When she comes in, there's trust straight away because it comes with her training. And I'm wondering, was it a little bit like that in Tesla as well? Is it because there's so much learning, because there's product specialism, because you're mobbing, does that actually build the trust so that people can literally move around to wherever they want to work to? Was there something else going on, Joe, that you think was helping to improve trust? Was it even an issue, trust, actually?
I love this topic. I think it's very important. First, let me say psychological safety, the concept where it's okay to say, I think we're doing the wrong thing. Even the newest person saying it to the most senior person right away, no delay. I think we're doing the wrong thing. Psychological safety, where everyone feels comfortable saying anything or doing anything or being anything that they believe is fit to purpose. That is the highest correlated metric in Google to their high performing teams. That is the metric for Google, psychological safety, as reported by the people working in Google. And when that's very high, Google has the highest correlation with that among any other metric they know how to measure in a high performing team. So we Agilists love psychological safety and are aware that our rate of learning is higher when we don't fear mistakes, and our rate of learning is lower when we fear making mistakes. Okay, so with that as a preset, early on in Tesla, there were things like agile trainings. I set some up in, I believe it was 2016, as I mentioned. There are no agile trainings anymore in Tesla. There are not agile coaches. So what is it? What works? Now there's cultural inertia. There's over 100,000 employees now acting with high trust. So it's like the crew model, I think, if I understand what you and describing what David Snowden and Cognitive Edge Consulting proposed, I think it's a lot like that, where you have now cultural inertia assuming high trust. And since everyone is acting that way nearly 100% of the time, it maintains. It perpetuates. For a lot of companies, I think they do need training, maybe 2 days, maybe a week for every headcount in the company to try to establish that. And then they likely need coaching to maintain that until it achieves cultural inertia. But what I will say is it appears once cultural inertia has happened, it self-maintains. Now, there is onboarding in Tesla. It's 4 hours long. And that onboarding consists of the ANTI handbook, which is a 4-page
I've
document.
heard about that. It's very funny.
It is amazing. And it essentially says everyone trusts you and you have to trust everyone. It doesn't use exactly those words, but that is one of the outcomes you would logically derive from that 4-page document, that you are fully trusted. So it is said to you. And then it's safety training. So there is a common level of safety training. So people are aware of human body mechanics. And if you lift something heavy with your back arched in this way, it's likely dangerous to you and anyone under you or near you. So everyone has at least seen that once. But any training gets forgotten, which is why we have coaches, right? Once you have 100,000 people continuously reminding each other simply by doing the work in mobs, you don't need other mechanisms, is what appears to be true. So I do believe there's a progression for most companies. I think it's possible for companies to reach this point. You don't have to be born this way, but I'm sure that helps. Is you do have training and coaching, but at a certain point, it does seem to become cultural inertia. And I think it is about high trust. Another Tesla employee, Farzad, who's 4 years in Tesla supply chain, essentially in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, was interviewing a Tesla software developer, Charlie, who worked in Tesla Fremont. Now, there's something very interesting about that already. Charlie is a software developer working in the factory. I want to stress this point. There's not some beautiful office somewhere.
Yeah, he's on the floor, basically.
Your goal is to be within 3 meters, if not touching distance, of whatever you're programming. So if you're programming a robot, you are there. You can touch that robot. There's a safety cage, but if it's tagged out and fully deactivated, you can touch it. Or if you're programming the circuit board that adjusts the way airbags fire, you are next to the robot that inserts that circuit board into the car to download your software into it. Even though you can do over the air, you are there. That is the goal. So that's interesting point one. About this train of thought is Charlie and Farzad in a recorded interview on YouTube, which is amazing. 2 other Tesla veterans interviewing each other, just phenomenal. Charlie talks about immediate assumed trust constantly and continuously, just zero question of it across all employees. So it's what you just said, John, that I think it's necessary to perform at any significant level and to reduce inefficiency through politicking or sub-optimization to try to grow your personal empire. There's just zero tolerance for personal empires. They don't last for more than minutes if someone tries to make them, because the work is transparent and everyone knows personal empires are bad. And that comes from the anti-handbook and then now the cultural inertia.
That anti-handbook sounds like a very interesting read. I can't wait to get my hands on it sometime.
I've started running retrospectives for other clients on that handbook. It has 16 points across its 4 pages. And I've started saying, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being Tesla, I mean, truly, they are amazing. How would you rate your company on each of these 16 points? Okay, what is one experiment that you could do tomorrow to improve your score on each point? That's your backlog. Let's execute.
Yeah, I really like that. That sounds really cool. You talked about distributed teams earlier on, Joe, and what I'm hearing about from colleagues, peers and so on, and on social as well, is that people managed to be much more efficient during the pandemic crisis with distributed teams. But the question out there is, have they managed to innovate? Have they managed to be creative? Have they managed to come up with fantastic ideas? I have a bias, I have to confess, because I have a style that's better face-to-face. So when I arrive in a site within 20 seconds, I pick things up immediately. But what happens to me doesn't have to apply to everyone. I'd love to know what you've experienced, Joe, in terms of innovation, creativity with distributed teams. It's a necessary thing in this world, but what's your thought? What are your thoughts on creativity and innovation in this distributed world, and whether it needs to be face-to-face again?
Well, I love it, John. I love it. Remote mobbing on a virtual product seems to be phenomenal. Now, I did just recently see a study on rate of innovation. It does seem to be, in some ways of measuring it, recorded higher face-to-face still, right? So that study was intriguing. I've not yet seen repeating studied with varying parameters to establish authentic applicability, but it's an intriguing thought. What I believe I've experienced is that mobbing at the point of production is the only way to have a significant pace of innovation. The cool thing is, when it's a virtual project, your point of production is your compiler, and that's virtual as well. So if you have rapid compiler feedback, your feedback from the compiler is instant no matter where you are in the world. That seems fine.
Yeah.
Now, the additional human feedback from being in temperature proximity, like it's getting hot in here. Why? I can smell sweat. Something's going on. Maybe their pheromones even go into play. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
Or the different levels of body language you can see when you're aware through your peripheral vision of how people's feet are moving.
Yeah.
All of that is likely important. But what I will say in physical work, if you're not at the point of production, you have no hope of a meaningful improvement cycle. You're delayed to months, if not years, for a single improvement. If you want to try to get 60 part changes in production in a day, that would be completely absurd if you're not only not in the factory, but at the point you're attempting to modify.
Joe, we're getting towards the end of the interview now, and I guess a question I'd like to ask you is, you've been in WIKISPEED, you were at Agile at Tesla, you were actually running Agile at Tesla, now I'm gathering you're doing some work at SpaceX. What's the difference between being at Tesla and being at SpaceX? I know you mentioned there's a lot of commonality, but is it almost like a ramp up as well in terms of complexity for you in terms of how to apply agility? How have you managed that?
SpaceX likes to recruit from academia, not for PhDs. As mentioned, Musk says, I've hired some people in spite of their PhDs, but never because of it. But SpaceX recruits more actively from academia. Now, Tesla and SpaceX recruit a lot of veterans from all nations' militaries. SpaceX, you do have to have ITAR clearance. So if you were in a foreign military, you do then need to go through ITAR clearance. Tesla, you can come right in. They're a general employer because they're not making something that looks a lot like a missile. Although arguably a Model S Plaid is a missile.
Yeah, looking forward to that actually. Yeah.
That's another topic entirely. So there is more of an academic culture around SpaceX. That said, the mobbing and the intensity is absolutely the same, is absolutely my experience. But if you're more comfortable with coming from an academic culture, that will be more welcome in SpaceX than in Tesla, is my understanding. But the actual work style appears to be identical across both companies.
Thank you. And one final question, Joe. One of the things I've observed over the last few years is some clients tie themselves up in knots, really, trying to do agility within silos, for example, and not working across value streams, like the opposite of what you were talking about. And there's lots of things that everybody knows needs to be done, but they're just not doing them. And it's almost like an internal competitive culture rather than a cooperative, collaborative culture. And so one of the things I'm playing around with as an adoption approach is borrowing from the ideas of Michael Sahota with his culture bubble and the less community with the parallel organization, about actually setting up a new organization to just bypass, and kind of what you were talking about earlier about volunteering and who wants to work on this thing, who's excited about this, that type of stuff. You've probably been insulated from, to a large extent, from lip service with your clients, but it's something that a lot of my colleagues and I come across. If you were to give any advice to people in these companies that aren't Tesla, that aren't SpaceX, but they're in the space, they do want to get better, but they're evolving, but they're not evolving quickly enough, what would be your kind of top tip? I know context is king and all that, but what would be your usual top tip, Joe, for people in that situation?
First, John, I agree with everything I just heard. So as usual, I think we're on the exact same page. Let me amplify what I thought you just said about a culture bubble and about a parallel organization. Absolutely. Completely. And then I'll put an acceptance criteria over it that I think is really important. And it's part of what I now call justice finance. Oh. And it's, I like your face there. Thank you, John. I'm kind. The reaction was charitable of you. I do think it's a very important concept about the organizational maturation, the organizational change, the fundamental speed. If you're on an annual budget and you get lean agile procurement from Mirko Kleiner out of Switzerland, but now global, and you get excellent lean agile procurement. So you have suppliers, some of whom are excited to give you new product once a week, or maybe like some of Tesla's suppliers, every 45 minutes, new product. As crazy as that is, they have suppliers that are working that fast. And you're on an annual budget. It won't matter. Your pace of change is a year. Yeah. So when we talk about companies paying lip service and having agility in silos, you're fundamentally limited by the budget cycle. Yeah. And I will assert, and then the promotion scheme. Exactly. And so if your pace of review for promotion is once a year and your annual budget is annual or longer, none of these other cool practices like lean agile procurement are going to be valuable for you yet. You won't be able to engage in their value. So what happens in this culture bubble when it works, and in a parallel organization when it works, is you have a shorter cadence of finance and a shorter cadence of review and a shorter cadence of approval. If your product approval takes a year, then you probably don't need faster than annual budgeting because you're going to be in test for a year. These are your bottlenecking factors. This is why open space conferences work. No one gets a promotion during or at the end of an open space conference. No one's salary changes and the budget doesn't change. You go and the event happens. It works. In Tesla, there are no performance reviews. No one cares. Your income is the stock price, and you determine that rate, how quickly you buy in at the employee discount to stock. You determine your promotion, and the stock price is how you get paid. No one cares if you're procurement level 1 or 2 until you leave the company. Then HR helps you. They help you update your resume so it looks like other companies, so they understand.
Yeah. So you look like a single skill specialist, even though it might be very broad, actually. Yeah.
So you're not gunning for promotion. There's no reviews. The budgets are real time. Anyone can spend money at any time. There is no budgeting meeting. It doesn't exist. This is what enables all these other agile practices. Now, extreme manufacturing makes sense. Lean agile procurement makes sense. Mob, swarm, test-driven development at this speed, it makes sense. So a parallel organization is not going to be any more useful over the long haul, over the initial excitement, than the legacy organization, unless the budgeting cycle, review cycle, and testing cycle are shorter than the legacy organization. The rate at which they're shorter is the rate at which you have a meaningful change, because pace of innovation is the only thing that matters in the long run.
Thank you very much, Joe. Very interesting talking to you as usual. Absolutely delighted that you came on the show, and best of luck with everything at SpaceX. I can't wait to hear more about it.
John, my pleasure and my privilege. Thanks for collaborating with me today. I'm cheering for you too.
It's all good. Thank you so much.